institutions might not have been directly responsible for some of the plundering of those objects, they have a moral obligation in order to return those objects.
Yes.
However, because their wealth is based on having those objects from Egypt in the British Museum, for example, there's a reluctance to give it back on an economic level.
Yes.
And how do they manage that? So there's a whole process of conscientization and everything that goes on. And so part of what I do is I don't necessarily engage with those institutions, and I much rather focus on working with indigeneity and in a UK context, people of a marginalised background. But at the same time, I lived in South Africa for 10 years, and so what that meant being a decolonial curator was that you didn't actually engage in any kind of curatorial or cultural production, because my take on it was that you silence yourself in order to centre others. So basically my curatorial practice looks almost non-existent as like a dedication to the process of decolonisation.
Yes.
And then the other thing is, which is a human ecologist. So I've got a master's degree in human geography, spaces, politics and ecologies. And a lot of my work, which is started out as a curatorial career and then shifted into life coaching, so I'm a master life coach as well.
Yeah.
Which I did in South Africa because I didn't want to get involved in cultural production. Basically centres around the idea of eco-justice, and when you've got eco-justice which goes hand in hand with decolonisation, because like, you know, Indigenous people are the best people to manage their environments.
Definitely.
And then you've got problems with mental health, or I like to call it systemic trauma, and how trauma rises in the landscape, and the fact that all of our climate crisis and climate emergency are all centred around human behaviour. So we have to make interventions into human behaviour in order to address the climate emergency. So I'm doing a lot of things all at once.
Yes, all intertwined, yes.
Yeah, but when you look at human ecology and you have to make those interventions into human behaviour, then really you're looking at environmental psychology, though I'm not qualified in that, but maybe I'm going to do a PhD in that sometime soon.
Yeah, we wish you best of luck with that.
Thank you.
And what about the book? Like, we're here in Dahab, and like, you know, you're spending most of your time like either on the beach or on your laptop, busy writing. And what's that book about?
So the book that I'm writing actually goes hand in hand with a course that I run, and the course that I run is called Trauma Doula Preparation. Which is about people who might be alternative practitioners or activists, because a lot of activists deal with trauma as well.
Yes, so true.
And the fact that they often become lay practitioners in trauma care and trauma work without any professional like training
or support.
And so it's about trauma doula. Training is all about how we upskill lay practitioners. But also, for me, what's important is when we upskill lay practitioners is that, unusually for like what you might call a trauma-informed or trauma-aware course, I'm much more interested in educating people about the systemic issues that cause trauma.
Yeah.
Much like, so colonialism's a system.
For instance.
Capitalism's a system.
Yes, definitely.
And within those systems, there are what you would call severances, or I call them severances, like racism or bigotry based on religion, that then cause us to separate ourselves and cause these fractures in identity.
Yes. And
so part of what I do as trauma doula training is make people aware of these systemic issues, which are traumagenic, which means they reproduce trauma, in order for people to become aware of how they embody toxic and what I call anti-human systems, like colonization,
for instance,
in their day-to-day lives and practices. And then that kind of opens up a journey to a process of decolonization, which is de-traumatization and back into indigeneity. And so they create much better relationships or understand that people have to create much better relationships with people, land, place and space in order to do deep, authentic trauma healing.
Yes, and be themselves, who they're up to be.
Yeah, and that's not always true, but it's a significant part of trauma training and teachings that's overlooked currently, that needs to be more integrated, especially when you look at where mental health crises meet climate emergencies.
Yes, it's all intertwined, I believe, and it's all come together because everything is related after all. We cannot separate this of that. Like, the human being, like, the consciousness is part of the whole universe. It's multi-thing. So whichever you kind of heal, like, on a scale, it matches this other scale. Like, it's all one entity, I believe. What do you think are the best alternative, like, systems, like, after decolonizing and things and the capitalism? What works out best for the people, you think, to get back their own identity or to get back to their indigenous kind of sense of origin or roots?
Yeah, so that's what I'm writing the book about, and the book is called Disentangling Systemic Trauma. And it's basically giving people a pathway and processes and trauma-informed systems in order to unravel all of that work. What's also interesting, which I forgot to mention, is I'm a traditional Zulu doctor, which means, and most people would just put that together as a witch doctor. So I trained in South Africa with traditional healers, and that's part of what I do. But what people don't understand about Indigenous wisdom keeping is Indigenous wisdom keeping is incredibly rich and incredibly complex and incredibly nuanced, and we have complete knowledge systems within African tradition that are fully operational and very intelligent, that work with things like natural law and systems. And so when you consult with a traditional doctor or with me as a traditional doctor, what I do is I do something called throwing the bones.
What's that?
It's basically a collection of found objects that I throw in what you might call a fortune telling, but it's a lot more deeper than fortune telling, because what we do is we understand that everything works in the quantum field.
Yes.
And so at the centre of traditional Zulu culture, we have something called the ancestors.
Yes.
And most of us would understand the ancestors as our most immediate human ancestors.
Yes.
And that is true, and they are a doorway to the ancestors. But the ancestors in a general African cosmological sense is about the interconnectedness of everything.
Yep.
So, and it also accounts for evolutionary biology. So, for example, a traditional Zulu doctor knows that they come from the ocean, the primordial soup of the ocean, and the ocean is one of our oldest ancestors.
Yes, true.
But equally well, because the quantum field is non-linear and multidimensional,
exactly,
we are automatically related to every life form on this planet. So a bird is an ancestor, a tree is an ancestor. And these things, when we are working with deeper levels of consciousness, basically can communicate with us within our collective conscious field to bring us signs and symbologies and augury. And so when we throw the bones, we understand that these inanimate objects or found objects, when we throw them, are completely under the influence of the quantum field.
Wow.
And so the found objects are given specific meanings that work across a lot of traditions in Africa, and then through how they fall, and I know how they fall and I know how to read them, we then actually unpack what is going on in your life or your family system, or what is going on in your life path journey and what decisions you have to make. And it's very accurate, and it's our primary source of diagnosis as a traditional Zulu doctor.
Doctors, or
and
indigenous doctors.
And Zulu doctors aren't the only ones that do it. And in fact, I understand that people do something very similar with shells, more in Jordan. I haven't heard about it so much in Egypt, that kind of, it moves across the African continent.
Okay, that's very good. And where are you with the book now? Like you're almost.
Oh, well, so basically what I've realised is, like any creative project, it's morphed. So I was writing this guidebook, and so the guidebook for the trauma doula prep course is just about finished. But that's only available if you do the trauma doula preparation course.
Yep.
But what I realised is, because I've been doing numerous pieces of writing, is the book Disentangling Systemic Trauma is going to be about a layered approach to systemic unravelling and pathways of
finding
sort of different books that I've been writing on, or different articles that are now going to come together and create like a complete framework as to how to disentangle systemic trauma, how to de-traumatize aspects of your life by looking at your relationship with your immediate family systems and your ancestors, and your relationship with people, land, place and space. And then pathways out of that, which look at things like ancestral healing and land healing and land trauma, and what I call indigeneity, which is like reclaiming things like your mother tongue, or reclaiming your own traditional practices, or reclaiming the traditional practices of your family or your
heritage.
Origin or your heritage. But also about, especially if you've got a colonialist mindset, because obviously I'm a Scottish person living in Egypt, and that can be deemed as highly problematic, about how you recreate pathways to indigeneity, which is like an integration with the culture in which you're living, or that your ancestors have been brought to, because we've got a lot of separation, you know. So like people who are British traditionally wouldn't have mixed with Egyptians, or Egyptians don't mix with Bedouins. So it's like, how do we integrate with the culture that's around us? And then interestingly, like for me, that's part of the work that I'm doing here, because I'm currently in the old Israeli school in Asla, which is the oldest building in Asla and Dahab. And I've been doing a lot of energetic work and prayer work and foundational work to clear this space in relation to what's going on in Gaza. But also what's really interesting about me ending up in Egypt, because I didn't know I was going to end up in Egypt, because I'm on a massive spirit quest.
Because
I came,
we all are.
Because I arrived in Dahab quite unexpectedly. I didn't even know it existed.
The land of magic.
In the land of magic. So there's a relationship between Egypt and Scotland, because Scotland actually takes its name in myth and legend from Scotia, who was an Egyptian princess.
Oh wow.
And so I'm now working on a whole load of stuff about energetics, about connecting Egypt to Scotland and what that original relationship was, and whether anything can be garnered from that for prosperity in terms of the greater national story of Scotland, but also what my personal story is with that story, with Scotia going to Scotland and basically becoming the Queen of Scotland, or the first Queen of Scotland, because it took its name from her.
So Scotland, like so you're originally Scottish. I understand.
Yeah, I'm originally Scottish.
Scottish, and like you know, the name Scotland comes from a princess or a queen, Egyptian queen.
Yes.
You say that? Oh my God, that's new to me. It's my first time to hear this story. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, most people don't know that story. It's quite archaic and very old. And then some of our oldest crown jewels, because Scotland's got the oldest crown jewels in Europe. Not actually made of silver, but a constituent part of those crown jewels, I think they would call them crown jewels, is the stone of destiny.
The crown jewels.
So a constituent part of that is the stone of destiny, which every Scottish king, and resultantly every king or queen or royal of the sovereign of the United Kingdom, has been crowned on, sitting on the stone of destiny. And the stone of destiny was said to be brought from Egypt to Scotland by Scotia.
Yeah, a lot of stones and a lot of things have been brought from Egypt to like a lot of places in the world. Yes.
Yeah.
That's so true, and that's amazing. And yes, and you said like Gaza, like you know, on the way while you were speaking, like you said, you're doing something and like in the direction of like you know supporting, or like you have this in the sense of what you're writing, like, as well, like, or maybe what's going on is a reflection of what you're really doing, or it's a manifestation of actually, and it's all related, what's going on in the world. We cannot separate this out of that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, what you can say about Gaza from my perspective is that Gaza and Palestine are a crucible of systemic trauma, and the fact that they are being subject to these forces that are out with their control, which are essentially colonialism, because we know that's what it was because of the Balfour Agreement, Zionism, which doesn't originate from Palestine, and yet they bear the brunt of that settler colonial ideology, which is imposed on them and upheld by systems of colonization, and upheld by ideas of white body supremacy, embodied in colonialism and racism that are to do with that, and ideas of bigotry and Islamophobia, and there's a whole load of other intersections and layers that you could say impact the Palestinian people and Gaza as a result of all of these systems that are designed to separate us and dehumanize us and to disempower us, and within that, as a result, brutalize us, and sadly to say is that are resultant in genocide and ecocide.
Yes.
And
and apartheid as well.
And apartheid as well. Yeah, of course, apartheid. How could I forget apartheid, having lived in South Africa for 10 years?
Yes.
So all of these ideas and these ideologies are coming down full force on the Palestinian people at the moment. And they're bearing the brunt of that unconscious shadow work of our current governmental systems, and our geopolitics, and within a Euro-American paradigm, because it doesn't represent what the global South or South Africa sees the world, or even how China sees the world, or how Russia sees it. But this Euro-American narrative that's pushed as a global predominant narrative is highly toxic and needs to be shifted radically.
Definitely.
And it is shifting radically,
right,
but it's
now.
Not shifting quickly enough.
Yes.
And at the same time, there's this idea that Europe and America are the central axis of power. And I don't think that's any longer true.
Yes, thank you.
What we're seeing is an empirical collapse of the British systems and the Euro-American systems and the European systems.
Yes,
they haven't woken up to yet, because they still view themselves from a superior
point of view or perspective.
Because I've lived in South Africa and other places, I've really done a lot of work. That doesn't mean that my work's completed. It will never be completed.
It will never be completed. Work never ends.
Never ends. But it's for me, it's about this idea of how do you really take away that imperialistic standpoint, like root and stem, so that we really take the masks off of that propaganda and the brainwashing that underpins it, because most Europeans and most British and most Americans don't know that they're completely brainwashed.
Right, with this postmodernism kind of thing, and being distracted by this whole
this
colors,
and the spectacle as well. The idea of the spectacle. So that's what the book is. That's what the book is all about. And looking at consent and how consent and respect are building blocks for indigeneity and indigenous culture, and that within indigenous cultures globally there are set frameworks that underpin those indigenous knowledge systems that are really easy to access. However, if you've grown up in an oppressive system, we have grown up disconnected.
It'll be more difficult for you to connect to something that's already there for you. Yes.
So it's about how do you connect to that and make a pathway forward with it, and so that's what the book is really all about.
Yes, wow, it's so interesting. When it's going to be out and about for people or for us to read? Where can we find it, Kim?
I don't
Find
know.
it.
I don't know yet. So I collaborate with an organisation called the Red Tent Dualists, who
Okay.
are based in the UK, and I work with an amazing woman called Nicola Goodall.
Okay.
And so you can check out her website, which is redtentdualist.com. But she also has a publishing company as part of that called Wise Women Publishing.
Wise Women Publishing.
I think it's Wise Women Publishing or
Wow.
Wise Women Publishers.
Okay.
And it's Wise with a WYSE. And she's got a few other books on there. And it has to be finished before I can give you a date for the publication.
We wish you
as
best
soon
of
as it's
luck.
finished, I'll phone you and I'll let you know.
I hope we can get a free copy. Like,
Yeah, well, I can speak to the publisher and see what she says, but I'm sure we can arrange that for you for sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Kim. It's been amazing talking to you. And let's say the straight line. Let's hope peace and freedom and serenity and oneness of this whole world. And let's hope for everything to be right and back to place. And let's for our folks in Palestine, let's wish them all the best, and let's wish them to hold on and freedom for them. Freedom, yes.
Freedom. None of us are free until all of us are free.
That's so true.
And never forget to say free Palestine.
Free Palestine, yes, yes.
Yay.
Yeah, that's nice, guys, and bye-bye. And bye-bye. Okay, thank you, girls. Bye-bye, Green Door.